with Russian President Vladimir Putin making his first visit to occupied Ukraine since the war began. And look, this is video of him driving through the city of Mariupol, which Russia occupied last year. The city suffered heavy damage in fighting and became the symbol of Ukraine's resistance to Moscow's aggression. The Kremlin says Putin also stopped in their neighborhood and spoke to residents. They say he was invited into one of their homes. Now, earlier on Saturday, Putin flew to Crimea to mark the 9th anniversary since Russia announced the annexation of the Ukrainian peninsula. The move was made after Russia sent in troops and staged a hasty referendum in 2014. Ukraine says Crimea has been suffering under Kremlin rule. Kyiv also said it's only a matter of time before all of its occupied lands are liberated. CNN's Claire Sebastian joins us now from London with more. So, Claire, what message is Putin trying to send here?
Well, Kim, these visits were unannounced and come just a day, of course, after an arrest warrant was issued by the International Criminal Court against Vladimir Putin himself. Obviously, with Crimea, it was designed to coincide with the anniversary of that annexation, the 9th anniversary. But visiting Mariupol, which we believe is the first time he's visited Russian-occupied territories in Ukraine since the invasion began, that may be read as an act of defiance, a low-risk one. It should be noted, given that this is Russian-occupied territory, but still, thumbing his nose potentially at that arrest warrant. In terms of the Russian people and how this is being presented to them, look, I mean, he's seen behind the car there, driving from the airport in Mariupol towards Mariupol. We believe the last time we saw him behind the car was behind the wheel of a car was driving a truck across the Kerch Bridge to Crimea that was blown up in the autumn and then partially rebuilt by Russia. It's designed to project control, that he's in charge. I think there's also an element of normalizing these territories as part of Russia. He's there with the Deputy Prime Minister, Marat Khusnulin, discussing reconstruction of apartment buildings. They even visit the Philharmonic, which is not far from that drama theatre, which was bombed by Russia almost a year ago to the day, in what is believed to be the biggest, perhaps, mass casualty event of this war. There you see him sitting in the Philharmonic. The Deputy Prime Minister also noted that they expect to have a performance at the Drama Theatre as soon as April, so very much touting their reconstruction efforts here. Of course, they've been doing this kind of normalization with Crimea since 2014, so I think that's the message they're trying to get across. But of course, Ukraine is making it very clear that any kind of negotiation with Russia will have to involve the return of these territories, something that Russia is clearly taking off the table.
All right, thanks so much. Claire Sebastian in London. Appreciate it. Now, for more on this, I'm joined in Kyiv by international human rights lawyer Wayne Jordash. Thanks so much for being here with us. So I want to just start by getting your reaction to what we were just talking about there. A day after the ICC issues an arrest warrant for Putin, Putin shows up in Mariupol, a site of many alleged war crimes by Russia.
Yes, I mean, it's obviously, as your previous speaker just said, it's some kind of act of defiance, but a rather empty gesture in the end. The arrest warrant he now faces will severely restrict his movement internationally. So heading to Russian-occupied territory, which belongs to Ukraine, may be an act of defiance, but as I say, it doesn't speak to the bigger problem he now faces.
All right, so as an international human rights lawyer, you have a lot of experience dealing with the International Criminal Court. So how do they make the case against Putin? What kind of evidence will they be relying on here?
Well, for this particular narrow set of charges, which relates to the deportation of children from Russian-occupied territory into Russia, the evidence really consists of 2 or 3 main points. Firstly, his public appearances, where he clearly accepts, along with the Commissioner for Children's Rights, who's also subject to an arrest warrant, that they are involved in a scheme of so-called adoption. So there's the public admissions from Putin. Secondly, there's a presidential decree which, again, implicates Putin and the government in relation to these adoptions. And then, of course, there's the evidence from the ground. That is, thousands of children going missing from Russian-occupied territory, many of them with parents, and disappearing into Russia. So it's the scheme plus the admission. And I'd also say this. Putin is subject to an arrest warrant on the basis of superior responsibility, which basically means that he has not prevented those crimes or punished them. And that's why his admissions publicly are so important. He's essentially approving of these crimes when he's giving these public comments, and therefore admitting to failing to exercise his superior responsibility, which is a really serious issue.
Yeah, and you were speaking about sort of those narrow charges, but obviously there's going to be many more. Your organization has experience with these mobile justice teams that collect evidence in cases like these. So what's involved with that, and what kind of challenges do you and other investigators face?
Well, our mobile justice teams are essentially a support structure for the prosecution. At the moment, there are hundreds of prosecutors and thousands of police officers and hundreds of state security officers from Ukraine in the field gathering evidence. And it's a really difficult task. Number one, because the volume of crimes is absolutely overwhelming. Russia's tactics essentially focus on attacking civilians. So that gives rise to literally thousands of potential crimes. Every time an area is liberated, mass graves are recovered, detention facilities are recovered, there's forcible displacement, there's theft of children, and so on and so forth. So it's a very difficult job on the ground to actually collect evidence. And that's the first phase. That essentially builds a picture of who did what on the ground. The next phase is the most difficult phase, and that's building up the chain of command. Who ordered those crimes? Who facilitated them, who planned them, who designed them, who controls them. And that tracking up the chain of command is how you implicate people, politicians such as Putin.
And, you know, so you're saying that the volume of the material is daunting, but also when it comes to the digital evidence, sifting through all of it, and especially determining what's real and what isn't, that must be a huge challenge as well.
Well, this is undoubtedly the most documented crime base or conflict the world has ever seen. There are literally thousands of organizations documenting these crimes. And of course, there's a whole prosecution and judicial apparatus here documenting these crimes. And of course, we live in the digital age. So everything is photographed, everything appears on video. There's open source experts such as Bellingcat and so on collecting evidence. So it's a really daunting collection of evidence. We're talking about hundreds of thousands of videos, hundreds of thousands of photographs, and so on and so forth. So trying to sift through that is going to be the challenge. Much of that, regrettably, will not be that useful in a courtroom. Your amateur investigator can be extremely crucial to an investigation, but much of what they collect can also be collected in a way which is just not admissible in a trial process. You can't verify the video, you can't authenticate the photograph, you just cannot understand its relevance or its probative value. So it's a great thing to have all this documentation, but it's also a real problem in terms of being able to sift through it and build a case, a coherent and robust case.